Welcome back into the Mental Game. I'm your host, Brandon Saho, and this week's guest is legendary broadcaster Marty Brennaman. And in this episode, Marty opens up about his Hall of Fame career, the Reds franchise, some of his favorite stories from behind the mic in the booth, but also we talk about mental health and why he's become more comfortable being emotional as a man later in his career and later in life. All of that and much, much more coming up in the final episode of Season 1 of the Mental Game. But before we get started, let's kick things off with this week's Mental Health Tip of the Week, powered by 1 in 5, and it is all about physical health. Staying active is just one example of how physical health can positively influence mental health. Things such as eating healthy and sleeping well can also contribute to better mental health and well-being. Eating a diet containing complex carbohydrates, lean proteins, and fatty acids, and avoiding processed foods can support your mental health. Creating a good sleep routine by going to bed at a similar time each night, making sure your space is relaxing and quiet, and avoiding screen time before bed will also help maintain your mental health. And if you or someone you know needs help finding a therapist or any mental health resources, go ahead and scan the QR code in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. It'll be up this entire episode, and it'll take you directly to 1 in 5's homepage, where their mission is to prevent suicide by stopping the stigma and starting the conversation. Now it is time for another awesome conversation here on The Mental Game with Reds Hall of Famer Marty Brennaman. Welcome back into the Mental Game, and as you can see, I'm joined by a very special guest, Hall of Fame Reds broadcaster Marty Brennaman. We're here in your Reds baseball man cave with a ton of you behind me.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Well, you and I were talking before we began the podcast. This room, unlike a lot of guys or women that are memorabilia collectors and they go out and buy stuff, and whether it be Bengals or Reds or a combination of both, most of the stuff in this room here is directly related to my career. Going all the way back to my first radio job in Salisbury, North Carolina, when I got out of Carolina, and a 1,000-watt radio station, and then it progressively works around the room to the end of my career. So it's an impressive. I've run out of rooms, wall space. I don't have any, and I got a lot more stuff, and I have nowhere to put it. But it's an impressive room. There's no question about that.
It's a Marty Brennaman museum, and I'm lucky to be here. We'll get into your career, obviously, here in a sec. But the first thing I ask everyone on this podcast is, what does mental health mean to you? And everyone answers it differently, whether they use it as a tool throughout their life, something they've discovered recently. But I ask you the same thing. What does mental health mean to you?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I feel like I'm blessed, and I have good mental health. I say that with a small level of reservation, because I think the older you get, there are certain byproducts of age that you really have you can have no control over.
Sure.
My memory's not nearly as good as it used to be. I can tell you what happened on July 3rd, 1983, but I can't tell you what happened yesterday. But I've been blessed, with great mental health my entire life, and my heart goes out to those who don't. And I know it has to be a real struggle to get to where you want to be. But, thank God there are a lot of people out there that have the backs of those who are struggling to get things together from a mental perspective. And if there's a heaven after we pass away, those people are going to be there.
We talked a little bit before we started rolling about the older that you've got, that you felt maybe more it's accepted to be emotional and show love throughout life as a man. I learned throughout my ups and downs that there is a stigma around men's mental health and maybe being emotional. What led you to those discoveries?
I don't know, Brandon. There's nothing that I could put my finger on. I just think it was I thought for years, and I worked with Joe Nuxall for 31 years on radio, and I used to kid with Joe because I'd accuse him of being able to cry at door openings and the sun coming up, which was almost true.
Yeah.
And I could never do that because I thought it was macho not to be able to do it. And as years have gone by, and I have grown to be a lot like Joe was his entire life. I'm a newcomer at the table in that respect, and I think now it's the guys who fashion themselves as being macho are guys that can cry when it's necessary. If an emotion is so overwhelming to them, then they shed tears. I think that's the greatest thing in the world. And there are certain things that get me going, talking about my career with Joe and talking about my work with the Dragonfly Foundation and things like that. And I'm not ashamed of that anymore. I can break down and cry at a speaking engagement if something. When Tom Browning passed away, it was devastating to me because he and I had become real good friends after he retired and looked at the game and the players from a different perspective.
Sure.
And I think from that point, he better understood what my career was about and how I approached my craft. And so when he went, it was terrible for me. I had 2 days and I was an absolute wreck. I think it's therapeutic if you can cry and you can express your emotions without any reservation or thinking somebody's pointing an accusatory finger at you and saying, well, you're not really a macho guy after all. I don't worry about that stuff anymore.
Well, I know you've always had a clean mouth, so I want to watch myself. And I've
had a lot of things, but that ain't one of them.
when I had to get my help, I went through therapy, went to the Linder Center of Hope in Mason here in Cincinnati, and one of the things they talked about is like, why do you not want to show emotions? I'm like, well, I've been a bitch my whole life. And they're like, well, that's part of the problem is that you're saying that you're a bitch if you show emotion as a man. So hearing stuff like that, what you just said, it resonates with me because I think every man, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but they go through that point where it's rub more dirt on it and just hide your emotions to get through this shit.
That doesn't even that right there doesn't resonate at all with me.
Yeah.
Because if I get emotional, then it's good for me to get it out rather than trying to hold it in. I think about when my dad passed away unexpectedly, and I broke down and cried. That was in 1991, and then my mom passed away 11 years later, but they were the only times that I think I ever really got emotional. And like I say now, it's hardly a week that goes by that something doesn't get to me from an emotional perspective, and I have no qualms or apologies to anybody when I break down and cry.
And I think it's important for us to, whoever you are, enjoy the moment and then also be able to look back and celebrate the things that have happened. Your career, starting out small, getting all the way to the Baseball Hall of Fame and calling Reds games for decades. Do you have a favorite moment that you can pick, or how are you able to just look back and appreciate everything that's happened in your broadcasting career?
I think more from a general perspective. I don't think there's one thing. If I had to pick the most special night I've ever spent in a ballpark, it was the night I got my head shaved and the night that I became a part of the Dragonfly Foundation. But in terms of the game itself, I was blessed to be a part of so many big moments and great players and 3 world championship rings and the whole 9 yards. And all those things were things that I never dreamed would ever be possible. But I think the biggest single thing is the fact that I was blessed to be able to be in this town for all of my 46 years as a big league baseball broadcaster, and was able to withstand the temptation of leaving. And I had ample opportunity to go all over the place, both franchises in Chicago, the Yankees in New York, the Red Sox, the Dodgers, the Giants. And every time if it got to that I had to make a decision, it was always no. I was happy here. I love this town. I think we who came from outside of Cincinnati have a better perspective about how special this town is than those who have were born and raised here and they never lived anywhere else to draw a comparison.
Yeah.
And so, I'm one of 6 guys that broadcast big league baseball for 40+ years and did it for only one team. And I'm thrilled. Yeah, that's a major source of pride for me, and I never even thought about it until somebody brought it up about 2-3 years ago. But it's I was just fortunate as far as the timing was concerned. I come in '74 and replaced Al Michaels, and then they won it all in '75 and '76. I thought you were supposed to do it every year.
Well, we'll get into the back end of your career and maybe some of the losing seasons here in a sec. But your first game for the Reds.
Yep.
Can you draw anything up? I mean, I've never heard of anything like that in my career.
Neither did Joe. Because when the top of the first ended and Aaron had tied Ruth's record, Joe said, "What the hell do you do for an encore?" I said, "I don't know. I have no idea."
So for those watching, Hank Aaron hits 714. That's your first inning?
It was 4 batters into my official broadcast career after being in spring training, and that was day one. And a guy who was one of my dearest friends on earth, Jack Billingham, was the opening day pitcher that day, and he let 2 guys get on base and with 1 out, and he fell behind to Aaron 3 balls and 1 strike, and tried to trick him, and he didn't trick him enough, and Henry lined it over the left field wall for the home run that tied Ruth's record. And I was aware of the fact, obviously, that he was going to have an opportunity to tie the record and possibly break the record, but then the Braves intervened, and they had no intention of playing him,
right?
Because they were going to go home and play the Dodgers at Fulton County Stadium on a Friday night. And so Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner, stepped in and said, "No, he's got to play 1 game and start another one. Now, you want to take him out early after the second time, but he's got to play 2 out of the 3 games." And so he played the entire first game. It was an extra inning game that the Reds won on a wild pitch that Pete Rose scored from second base on to win the game. It was incredible. And then Aaron goes home, and on Friday night he breaks a record by hitting a home run off Al Downing, a left-hander with the Dodgers. It was something. It really was.
And we've talked about special moments. That's starting your career in the big leagues with something incredibly special. We have a replica of the World Series trophy in front of us.
Yep.
To call 3 World Series championships, winning championships, how do you enjoy that moment, especially when it's just 2-3 years into your big league career with the Reds, but also, stay in the moment? Like, if there's enjoy the moment, but also stay working. Like, was there a pinch yourself moment when that was happening?
I don't really believe it was. They win it all against the Red Sox in '75. That was my second year, and I think there was still a little bit of the newness had not completely worn off.
Yeah.
And the impact that I think got more meaningful as we got further away from those 2 years. The impact of being around guys like Johnny Bench and Tony Perez and Joe Morgan and Pete and Concepcion and Foster and Griffey and Geronimo. I didn't, I was impressed with it. But as years went by and I started seeing outstanding baseball teams on any given year, and then I would inevitably compare, that team's not as good as what I saw in '75 and '76. I remember certain things about probably more the '75 World Series than I do '76, because '76 was over so quick. They swept the Yankees in 4 games, and then as opposed to the Red Sox that I can remember bits and pieces of every game. It went to 7 games, and the Reds came from behind, and Perez hit a big home run, I think, in the 6th or 7th inning off Bill Lee, and then they come back and they win the game and win the series on the day after a game that many people will tell you arguably is the greatest single baseball game ever played, and that was Game 6,
right?
When Fisk hit the home run in the extra innings to win the game. It was just a whirlwind, and I was fortunate because back then, in fact, that was the last year that the baseball, the 2 teams involved could name one of their broadcasters to represent them on network television. It stopped after 1975. Now, I worked in the 76 World Series. I worked on CBS Radio. But in the 75 World Series, I worked with Tony Kubek and Joe Garagiola and Kurt Gowdy. And I did the home games, and then when we went to Fenway Park, they used the Red Sox, and I used Dick Stockton, and I think they also used Ned Martin.
For a guy that's been able to have this long of a career in baseball and see 3 championships and do it in this place that has become your home, did it make it more special? You talked about staying in one place. You're one of, I think, what's it, six that have been at one with one ball club for 40-plus years in Major League Baseball. Does that add to I hate asking people about their legacy because a lot of people shy away from using that word. But does that add to it, you think?
I think to some extent it does, although it's a little-known fact. I mean, you're talking about, I'm trying to remember the other people, but Scully did nothing but Dodger baseball, first in Brooklyn and then in L.A. Denny Matthews with the Kansas City Royals, Bob Uecker with the Milwaukee Brewers, Jaime Jarrín, the Latin American broadcaster with the Dodgers, and I'm trying to remember myself, and I forget who the other one was, but that's not, I don't dwell on my career. I mean, I think
besides when you're in this room and there's 1,000 pictures of you and paintings.
I can't, we had to do this to get all that crap out of a box and thank God for Amanda.
I'm just giving you shit now.
I know you are, but Amanda put all this damn stuff together, and God bless her.
It looks
for
great
because a lot of the stuff in this room did not see the light of day for 40 years.
Wow.
I've got stuff that she had to dig out of boxes, and all this stuff was framed by a lady here in Cincinnati, 2 women that had framing shops, and it's a pretty good cross section of the way my career went, and I'm just thankful that it's up here. I don't relish Amanda's job when the day comes. If I precede her in going to the great big baseball park in the sky, she's going to have a hell of a job on her hands getting rid of all this stuff.
Well, there's a lot of big names in here, whether it be President Bush. Obviously, I want to ask you about Joe Nuxhall and the relationship you two had in the booth, off air. When I just say Joe's name and mention Joe, or anyone does, what comes to your mind first?
Well, to me, the first thing I tell people, with all due respect to Pete and to Oscar, even though Oscar was raised in Indianapolis, we all know the impact he had in college basketball at UC and then later in the NBA. But there's not a bigger sports icon in the history of this city than Joe was. And I say that because of the fact that he was such a sensational human being. I never heard a fan say anything negative about him because he was always nice to people. He always had time for people to talk, and I learned an awful lot from him when I first came here. In fact, he took me under his wing along with Sparky and Pete and Bench, and I just shut up and listened and watched him operate. And the longer we went, the closer we got, especially after I took up golf in 1995. That really brought us close together.
You've got some good golf stories, I've heard.
Yeah, I got some very good golf stories. And so I was blessed to work with him. And also the 31 years that we worked together equals the longest by a tandem doing big league baseball.
Wow. And
ironically, it equaled the 31 years that Vin Scully and Jerry Doggett worked together doing Dodger games.
That's a great company to be in.
Yeah, not bad, man. Not bad.
The years after you win in 75, 76, not you, the Reds,
yes.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You win in 90 to go wire to wire. That call, you're gonna laugh at me. I wasn't alive for 90. I've been, maybe me being born was part of the 29-year Cincinnati championshipless streak. We can throw it on me. That call is one of my 2 favorites from you. But getting once again, when you go, I can't do math in my head, but however long it was from 76 to 90. And
14 years.
Getting to call that game and just the drama that went into that series. When he makes that catch and you get to call it again, is there that same excitement as the first time it happened?
Oh, I don't think so.
No?
No.
Yeah.
I was thankful. They see by then, I don't know what the first year was, but by the time the Reds and the A's met in the World Series in '90, then the club, your broadcast crew could do the games all the way to the end on their network. And so I was thrilled for one reason, and that's because Joe got a chance to experience what it was like working in a World Series, because the club used me in '75 on TV, and they used me in '76 on CBS radio, and Joe didn't get a chance to do any of those games.
Wow.
And so when '90 came, then he and I stuck it all the way out through the League Championship Series against the Pirates, and then against the A's in the 4-game series sweep. And I was happy for him because of the opportunity that he was denied in the series in '75 and '76.
And you guys working together so long, getting to experience that together has to be something special. I mentioned my favorite call. It's going to be Junior in St. Louis.
Yeah, that might be mine.
Did you have that calculated, or?
You mean, did I plan what I was going to say?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I never did that.
Okay.
I know some guys that do that.
I've heard a couple of
But I'm not good enough. I wasn't good enough to do it and not make it sound contrived.
Right.
There are guys that think they did it good, but you listen to it and you can tell that's something that they planned. I was not good enough to do that. So my basic philosophy was to, make the call, talk about the things that make it special, talk about the secondary things like, and Griffey's home run that came off Matt Morris. It was on Father's Day.
Yep.
Senior was there along with his mom and his wife and kids, and just recount what was going on, and don't feel like you've got to fill every second in broadcasting, the event and the aftermath of the event. And just pray to God that you don't stumble over your words. And I was fortunate because that didn't happen. And the other one was Jay Bruce's home run against Houston that sent him into the postseason in, 2010. Yeah. They are probably my two favorite calls, because I think, I don't care what walk of life you're in, if it's performance-based, you're going to be your own worst enemy, so to speak. You're going to be your worst critic.
Yeah.
And there are times when, I've walked out of a broadcast booth in Cincinnati or wherever and had bad nights and knew I did. And then I felt really good about both of those calls. And it was kind of funny because then, 3 years later or whatever it was, when Junior was approaching 600, and I had the call there, and that was before about 18 people down in Miami.
That was so sad for me, because I was he hit against the Marlins in Cincinnati, I think, when he's going for 500. He hit like 497 and 498 on the same day.
Right.
And then the wind was blown in the next day, and then they hit the road, and that's when it happened in St. Louis. And then fast forward 600s in front of, like you said, 18 people.
It was unbelievable.
At Dolphin Stadium, where they didn't give a crap about anything.
It was amazing. I mean, here's a guy that, 500 home run careers don't fall off trees every day.
Right.
Yet to the people of Miami, they didn't give a damn. They didn't show up.
They had bottle service and some beach party to go to.
I imagine. It was disappointing, but the St. Louis thing made up for it because they had a full house that day. And it was good it would happen in St. Louis because of all the fans in baseball, no matter who they might support. I've often maintained the best fans in baseball are in St. Louis, and they genuinely appreciate moments like that, even though it comes from a visiting player, because they gave him a standing ovation, and that's the kind of baseball fan that you like to see, or sports fan that respects the fact that this guy did something big, and even though he's not wearing a Cardinal uniform, we respect the fact that he did it.
It's a great baseball town. They have great fans. I'll say the same thing about Milwaukee. It's a fun place to go. I did a road trip in 2021. You're not a Reds player manager, but you've been with and around the organization for a long, long time. When you're in that booth and things aren't as successful as the moments that we've talked about, there's been some lean years, and you're still a Reds ambassador, so I'm not going to ask you to bash the Reds or the front office. But you're supposed to be non-partial and be just a broadcaster when you're in the booth. But when you have such a connection to this city and that team, is it tough to go in there night after night when there's a lot of losses?
I don't know that it's tough because I love my job so much.
Yeah.
I've often maintained that if there's a pure art form in sports, it's doing baseball.
Yeah.
And I did college football. I did pro basketball. I did collegiate basketball. Did the NCAA tournament for 16 years on the CBS on the the radio network.
Right.
But I can walk. I could walk out of a booth and close the door and turn the page. Now, early days, it was tough for me. The first year, in fact, it got so bad that one night after, I don't know, in the third month or fourth month of the season, Sparky called me, and I was doing a pregame show with him every day like I did a lot of managers. And he said, before we start this interview, he said, you and I need to talk. And I said, about what? He said, you can't take every loss home with you like you do. He said, you're going to burn out in no time. He said, just remember, there are billions and millions of people around the world that don't even know who the hell the Cincinnati Reds are. So for you to get all bent out of shape, you've got to be able to suffer through a loss and then wake up the next day and it's a new day dawning. And he said, that's a great thing about baseball. Unlike football, you don't have to wait 7 days before the next game. And that was one of the defining moments in my career. Now, I would get bent out of shape during a game, and that's an understatement, I guess.
Yeah. I was gonna say I've heard it, and it's because you loved your job and you loved the team you called for too.
Yeah, and you want them to win, and I think after a while you realize this may be a year where they're not capable of winning,
right,
or winning more than they're losing, and you gotta ride it out. And now say this. If you're broadcasting for a team that's had a bad year and you're in the last month of the season, September seems like it takes 10 years to get over.
The call-ups,
it's terrible.
Yeah.
You just please God get this season over with. And it used to be, I could end a season, and I was thrilled to death that the season was over. But after a month, I'm ready to go again.
Right.
And I got to wait 3 more months. As I got older, that was not the case. I needed more time to regenerate my batteries and go at it again. But for someone who likes to do play-by-play, there is no better job than Major League Baseball. There's nothing better than that job. And to watch great teams and great players and travel the country on somebody else's expense.
Yeah.
It was just a dream come true for a guy who never, ever dreamed about doing Major League Baseball. I was involved in the old ABA days back in the 70s, and I thought that was the greatest thing on earth. And I had no designs and no aspirations of broadcasting big league baseball, and thank God it happened.
How hard was it? And I know this last 3-4 year vacation is going to probably make the answer pretty easy, but to walk away from a job where you were living a dream you didn't even know you had, and you're at the ballpark every day doing something you love. I was there for that final sign-off, and it was special. It was emotional, like we talked about earlier in this podcast. You let the emotion show, and it was unscripted, and it was genuine, and you could tell just how much you loved your job, baseball, the Reds, and the people of Cincinnati.
Yep.
What went through your head when you made that decision to walk away?
Well, you know what? It was easy.
Yeah.
It was really I guess I felt like when I made the decision, and I told Amanda after the 2018 season, I told her one night at home, I said, I think next year is going to be it for me. And she couldn't believe it. And I said, no. And even up to the time that Phil Castellini and I sat down, and I told him in January of 19, this is going to be my last year. I think Amanda felt that I would relent at some point and say, nah, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
And I never felt that way. I just felt like 46 years was long enough. And when he and I met, he posed the probability or the possibility of me staying around for 5 more years and walking away at the 50-year mark. And I said, there's not enough money in the Castellini family to get me to work for 5 more years. That's not going to happen. And so, I didn't want all the things that they did.
The Marty party, come on. You didn't want the big...
I was going to walk away. I was not going to tell a soul, and I made the mistake of telling some people. And I was going to do the last game of the season on a Sunday and call him on Monday morning and said,
I'm out.
I'm done with this. And he got upset, and I appreciated him for that because he said, you don't owe this to yourself. You owe this to this ball club. You owe this to the people that have listened to you loyally for all these years. You've got to let you know how much we appreciate what you've done. And nobody did it. You can say a lot of things about Phil Castellini that maybe he would not like, but as far as planning events are concerned, there's nobody that's ever been in this town that did it better than he did. And they did a wonderful job. I was blown away by how well it was done, and it was done in such a manner that it was not a everyday affair, which would have really gotten tiresome.
Right.
Because I really just wanted to do the season. Without a lot of hoopla. I felt like the fact that I'd been here all those years was enough payback to me.
Sure.
And the way the people had accepted me, and when I replaced a guy who's one of the 5 greatest play-by-play guys in the history of friggin' broadcasting,
Right.
Al Michaels. And so, it worked out fine. The last day was incredible. I couldn't even talk in the post game. It was tough for me to even put a sentence together. And then the deal down on the field after the game, and then it's over. And somebody asked me the other day, what did you do your first day after your last game? And I said I went to Kenwood Country Club and played golf with my 2 of my grandsons, and it was spectacular. And I've not looked back. I have not had any second guessing inwardly one time from the time that I announced that I was going to make 19 my last season. It was just time for me, for a lot of reasons, to walk away. I've told the story a million times. When Joe retired, there were things that he could not do because of his physical well-being or the lack thereof, and I decided then, with a pact with myself, that I was going to retire whenever that might have been, when Joe did, but I was going to retire when I had my health and I could go and do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, and I've been able to do that. And if I pass on tonight, I will have had an incredibly wonderful retirement. Amanda's had a hell of a lot to do with that. God bless her, because she won't let me sit on my ass and do nothing. and that has kept me young. I mean, hell, I'm 80 years old. And
you're cruising, golfing, you're doing everything.
Yeah, we've been to Europe 3 times. We're going to go back and go on a river cruise down the Danube in June. We're going to go to London and back to London, because London's our favorite city in Europe, in September. So it's been incredibly wonderful for me.
Usually I end the podcast with my guest giving someone advice. I'll give you two options. One, advice to a young broadcaster, or if you want to do the other or both, someone that is thinking about leaving their profession, retiring, going into that next phase of life, because I think a lot of people are nervous about both sides of that. So I'll let you pick either one. Or
Well, I think that part of it is much more vivid in my mind, because when I decided I was going to do it, and all through the course of the 19th season, I did took a very unscientific poll and asked people from all walks of life, whether they were CEOs of very successful companies, were they mailmen, were they factory workers, whatever there was. Did you miss it after you got away? And there were a goodly number that did, but there were also more that didn't. And that was the one thing I was banking on. And so I would say have a plan, whatever that plan might be, but have a plan that is going to keep you active.
Yeah.
My dad retired and had no plan, and he was dead in 3 years because he sat around all day and did nothing. That's the quickest way to an early grave. And I think you need to have some type of plan and work the plan. And if you do, you're going to be hopefully as happy in your retirement as I've been in mine.
Well, as a guy that grew up listening to you and Joe and playing wiffle ball in the backyard, I was part of that group, like I said, there on your final day and listened to you throughout your entire career. And I've got to know you since working here in TV in Cincinnati during that time, then now on the podcast, obviously. It's an honor. I thank you a lot for coming on, Marty.
Hey, my pleasure, Brandon. You're a good man.
Well, I don't know if everyone listening or watching would agree with you, but I'll take that endorsement any day.
Okay, pal. Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely, Marty. We'll see everybody back here next season on The Mental Game. And what a great conversation that was with Marty about his broadcasting career, the Cincinnati Reds, mental health, and everything he had to say. I can't thank him enough for being my final guest here on Season 1, and I can't thank all of you enough for watching, listening, commenting, tweeting, texting, whatever you've done to help me with Season 1 of The Mental Game. I can't thank all of you enough. It means the world to me. I promise we'll be back better than ever for Season 2. That'll be coming later this spring, with even bigger guests and even better conversations as we try to break the stigma surrounding mental illness. Once again, Brandon Saho signing out for the final time this season on The Mental Game.